Welcome, HGSE alumni, students, and friends to today's event. I'm Emily Williams, Director of Alumni Engagement and Lifelong Career Development. We're delighted to have you join us today for negotiations at home, work, and just about everywhere else. Before we get started, I have some light housekeeping items. As you can see, today's session is being hosted in a webinar format, and we will be circulating a recording along with a survey in a follow-up email early next week. So be on the lookout for your inboxes. Thank you to those of you who pre-submitted questions. Zachary will address most of them during his presentation. If a question arises as you're listening to the presentation, please feel free to put it into the Q&A box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will have a facilitated Q&A toward the top of the hour. Lastly, we have enabled closed captioning for today's session. If you'd like to see the captions, please click on the CC/live transcript button, then click on Show Subtitles. You can turn off subtitles by clicking on Live Transcript, then click Hide Subtitles. Now, without further ado, I will introduce today's speaker, Dr. Zachary Herrmann, EDLD, class of 2017. Dr. Herrmann is the Executive Director of the Center for Professional Learning and a member of the professional faculty at the Penn Graduate School of Education. As a graduate of the Doctor of Education Leadership here at HGSE, Dr. Herrmann leads professional learning focused on leadership development, team effectiveness, negotiation, and creative problem solving. Dr. Herrmann teaches the popular Penn GSE course, Collaboration and Conflict, Leading Yourself, Others, and Teams, which engages students in an interdisciplinary exploration of how people work together to solve complex problems, as well as a very popular elective on negotiation within the MBA program at the Wharton School. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Zachary Herrmann. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Emily, and hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. As a proud HGSE alum, it's a real honor to host this webinar and talk about a topic that I care a lot about. And hopefully you'll take away something interesting and useful for your own professional and personal lives. To begin, I want to start with kind of an assumption that I have, which is the world is full of really big, thorny, sticky problems. And in general, most of those problems require us to work together to take them on successfully. And unfortunately, we're not very good at it. And so a lot of my work revolves around helping people get better at working with each other to take on really big problems. And that's why this negotiation is talking about, or this webinar is talking about negotiating at home, work, and just about everywhere else, because I hope that the topics and the ideas and the strategies that we talk about during this webinar, you see applicable in every aspect of your life. So I'm going to share my screen. Again, negotiate at home, work, and just about everywhere. I'm going to go through a lot of different ideas. We're going to have Q&A, as Emily mentioned, at the end of the hour. But as we go through, I want you just to reflect, do these ideas resonate? Which of these ideas are powerful? Have I tried any of these ideas? And perhaps what do I hope to try next? I want to start by rethinking negotiation. You all signed up for a webinar focused on negotiation. So you probably have some ideas, some mindsets, some thoughts about how you approach negotiation. And I'm going to offer kind of a spectrum. Many of us approach negotiation as a fixed pie puzzle. And the purpose of the negotiation is to answer the question, how will we split this pie? The more pie I get, the less pie you get. And so it's a battle between me and you to figure out who gets the bigger portion. But as we kind of progress in our thinking around negotiation and start thinking about more creatively and more sophisticatedly, we start thinking about, well, maybe we want different portions of the pie. And this is a unique photo. It just seems like there's a little peach pie, but then also some sort of berry pie. And we start thinking, how do we distribute this fixed pie that we have in a way that actually meets both of our interests? Maybe I really like peach, you really like blackberries or blueberries. And so it doesn't make sense just to think about how do I get as much pie? It makes sense, how do I get the portion that's most valuable to me, and how can we get the portion of the pie that's most valuable to you? So we start thinking about our interests. What are we really trying to get after? What are we really trying to achieve? But then even further, this still has the assumption that there's a fixed pie to begin with. So as we progress kind of in our thinking about negotiation, we want to start asking ourselves, how can we actually expand the pie? How can we get creative with our counterpart to actually invent new options that provide mutual gain for both of us? And so this is not a webinar focused on how you can kind of swindle or get the most out of your counterpart, but really about how can you creatively problem solve with people to reach agreements that actually satisfy the goals that you're both bringing to the table. So to do that, we're going to talk about strategies for everyday negotiation, and I'm going to go through 11 of them. And we're going to go through these relatively quick. I'm going to give some examples. I'm going to cite some research. But as I go through these, I'm going to tell you what the quiz at the end is going to be. It's really simple quiz. It's, have you tried any of these strategies? To what effect? And which of these are you eager to try? Which might you be ready to commit to trying even today? So keep that in mind as we go through. The first is to clarify your interest. And when we talk about our interest in negotiation, we're really talking about our driving goals. What is it that we are trying to achieve through this negotiation? And it's important to think comprehensively. It's easy to think about, like in a job negotiation, maybe our economic interests, but that is likely not the only interest at play. We have substantive interests, the issues, the interest that we have on the issues on the table, but we also have relational interests. We have an interest in the relationship with the counterpart. We have an interest in our reputation. We have an interest in carrying ourselves and acting in a way in which that we feel proud about ourselves. And that further our reputation as a kind of a fair, principled, ethical negotiator. And we don't want to act in a way that might be pursuing our economic interests if it doesn't pursue our much broader interests. So we really need to be mindful. What is it that we actually care about? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And I want to make a distinction that's really popular within negotiation theory and practice, which is the difference between interests and positions. The position is kind of where we stand on a particular issue, but the interest is the underlying goal or reason for our position. So for example, my position might be, I want to go out to eat. Your position might be, you want to eat at home. Those are our positions, and we can see that those positions are incompatible with each other. They both can't happen. However, there's likely a reason, a broader interest behind my position, as is there likely is for you. And if we can dig into what is the interest behind those positions, we might be able to create a solution that satisfies both of our goals. So for example, I might want to go out to eat because I don't want to cook and I don't want to clean up. But you might want to eat at home because you're tired and you don't want to go out into the car. So maybe we find a way to get takeout, or maybe we go to a restaurant that's close. While that is a different position than either of us started with, it might satisfy both of our interests. I might want a long vacation. You might want a short one. Perhaps I want a long vacation because I'm really tired at work and I really need some break and I need to kind of a long extended time. You might want a short one because you don't want to be away from home for too long. So maybe we decide on doing a long staycation. Again, the positions are incompatible, but when we dig into the interests, we might find that there are solutions that satisfy both of our interests. So this is the first strategy, is to really clarify your interests going into negotiation. Do your homework about your interests, get clear on this, and then also do your homework about your counterpart. Come prepared so you understand what your counterpart really cares about. What are they trying to achieve? Next is assess your alternatives. A lot of students and kind of a lot of colleagues come to me and they ask me this question: is this a good offer? Whether it's an offer for a new job, or an offer for a new position, or an offer for taking on a project. And that is a really difficult question to ask, and it might not even be the right question. Instead, try asking, is this a good offer compared to? You need to assess what alternatives you have so that you have some sort of reference point to determine whether or not the offer on the table is a good one. Do you have other job offers? Do you have other alternatives? Do you have other houses that you're looking at? Do you have other projects that you might want to take on? Those should be your comparison points about whether or not a particular offer on the table is good. And we have this term in negotiation theory and practice called BATNA, which is our best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This basically means if we don't get an agreement at the table right now, what am I going to fall back on? What is the best alternative that I have? That alternative helps me determine whether or not I should take the deal on the table. So strategy number 2, assess your alternatives and make sure that you've got a clear understanding of what you will do if you don't reach an agreement in this particular negotiation. Sometimes you might have a very strong alternative. Sometimes you might have a very weak alternative, which will change kind of what you might be willing or not to accept. One of the biggest pieces of advice I give people that are applying for jobs, that are negotiating a job, another job, is to try to get another job offer. Sometimes there's a lot of constraints about what a particular HR department or organization can offer you in terms of compensation and other kind of benefits. The most powerful thing that you can do is to try to figure out what alternatives you have. So is that offer on the table good, bad, mediocre? How does it compare to something else? Next is to build your relationship. And I'm going to quote a pretty seminal book here in negotiation, Getting to Yes, when it comes to the importance of relationships in negotiation. Most negotiations take place in the context of an ongoing relationship where it is important to carry on each negotiation in a way that will help rather than hinder future relations and future negotiations. Again, it's not just about the negotiation at the table. It's how is this setting up future agreements, future partnerships, future collaborations with this particular individual. In fact, many long-term clients, business partners, family members, fellow professionals, government officials, or foreign nations, the ongoing relationship is far more important than the outcome of any particular negotiation. Focusing on the relationship, a trusting relationship where you care about your own interest, but you also care about their interest, their long-term success, is a really important thing to consider when engaging in a negotiation. And in fact, when we look at the skilled behavior of negotiators, we know that skilled negotiators, in comparison to average negotiators, do things that are less irritating to their counterpart, and they also do things that are less classified as defending or attacking. We often have this vision of negotiation from kind of Hollywood films or movies or TV shows where a negotiator comes in, they're super aggressive, they're super adversarial, they're super tough. But in fact, our research suggests that that's not how skilled negotiators achieve good outcomes. They focus on building a relationship. And in fact, any type of verbal behavior that is antagonizing without a persuasive effect is unlikely to be productive. So we don't want to make it difficult for them to want to work with us. In fact, we want to build a trusting, strong relationship to make it easier to collaboratively problem solve around the issues that we're exploring. I want to also introduce another framework called the core concerns. This comes from the book Beyond Reason, which explores the emotional element of negotiation. Kind of one of the core premises of this book counteracts this narrative to leave emotions off the table. When you're in a negotiation, just keep to the facts, just keep to kind of the objective aspects of the negotiation. But in reality, we are emotional beings. Emotions are going to have a important component in how we perceive things, how we interact, how we feel about things. And so we can't ignore that. Instead, how do we actually use emotions in a way that's helpful to us, that's helpful to the counterpart, that's helpful to a collaborative agreement? And these two researchers, actually from Harvard, looked at what are these core concerns, these universal concerns that everyone has within the context of a negotiation or a relationship. And they outlined 5 of them. The first is appreciation. We all want to feel appreciated. We all want to feel like our work, our effort, our contributions are appreciated by our counterpart. And when we feel like we're not appreciated, that relationship can be really strained. The second is affiliation. We want to feel connected. We want to feel like we're in the in-group. We want to feel like we have some sort of true affiliation and connection with our counterpart, that we're not adversarial, but that we're actually in this together. The third is autonomy. We want to feel like we have the ability to make decisions that impact ourselves, that we have agency, that we're not being imposed upon, that we have free will, that we can make choices. And when we feel like others are making choices for us, or that our autonomy is being infringed on, we feel very threatened and we might feel very defensive, which again can constrain and restrain the relationship. The next is status. We want to feel like our status is being respected, that what we're bringing to the table, our experiences, our position, kind of our role isn't being downgraded, that we're really being respected for who we are and what we're bringing. And then finally, role. We want to feel like that we have a fulfilling role to play, that we actually have a role in the process of solving the problem, that we're not just kind of, we're not sure how we're supposed to engage, we're not sure how to act, and that we're really satisfying kind of a fulfilling role. So this is going to be the first poll that we're going to take. I want you to think about a recent interaction or negotiation that was tough. Perhaps you left feeling frustrated, upset, disrespected. And I want you to think which core concern felt threatened. Maybe you didn't feel appreciated. Maybe you didn't feel connected with that individual. Maybe you felt like you were being imposed upon, or you were losing a sense of autonomy. Maybe you felt like your status wasn't being respected. Maybe you felt like you didn't have a clear or fulfilling role to play within the interaction. And I also want you to think about, in your future negotiations and interactions, which of these do you need to pay more attention to when it comes to how you interact with the counterpart? So, Lisa, if we can launch this first poll and get a sense of where people are at. So thank you, Lisa. Lisa launched this poll. We'll take a few moments to respond. All right, take a few more seconds to respond if you haven't already. All right, Lisa, why don't we go ahead and stop the poll and share the results. All right, let's see. In response to the question, which of the following core concerns were not met during your tough negotiation, there was actually a fairly good mix, but the top one was appreciation. Half of us indicated appreciation, and this was a multiple choice, so half of us indicated that. And then there was also a fairly good distribution across all of the core concerns, but again, appreciation came out on top. When I think about appreciation, this can be the one that I really need to focus on. I often feel appreciative of the people I work with, of my family, of my colleagues, of the people that I'm negotiating with, but I don't always express it. And so this is a really important reminder that we can't just feel appreciative, we actually need to express it. And we need to think, do the people on the other side of the table actually feel that we are appreciative of their contributions, of what they're bringing to the table, or not? So hopefully this core concerns framework is a helpful thing for you to think about in terms of your relationships. I use it both as a diagnostic tool as well as a planning tool. It's diagnostic for me because after an interaction, if I feel like, that didn't really go well, I feel a little bit weird about it. I feel a little bit like that, it was a little bit awkward, a little bit tense. I'm like, okay, well, which one of these core concerns might have felt threatened for me? And maybe it's autonomy, like I feel like I didn't really have a choice in the matter. Or maybe it was status, that I wasn't really respected in kind of the role that I'm bringing to the table. Or maybe it was appreciation, that I had done all this work and then it was kind of brushed aside. So it's helpful for me to understand how I might be experiencing something, but I also use it as a planning tool. Before I go into a negotiation, and this is what the authors recommend you do, take a few minutes and think about, where might my counterpart be with respect to these core concerns? And how can I be active and proactive in making sure that they feel like these core concerns are being met? It's going to set the stage for a much more productive interaction and hopefully a more successful negotiation. All right, moving on. We're going to go to signal your intentions. So simply framing the negotiation as one that is kind of positive, productive, oriented towards solving problems. You might have this mindset in your mind, but it's also worth it to explicitly communicate this at the onset. Your willingness to collaborate and be flexible. One way to do this is to emphasize your long-term relationship. We tend to be more cooperative and more trustworthy with people who we know we're going to have repeated interactions with. The example that I often give is if I'm buying a car or I'm kind of, going to a store and I say, I'm not from here. I don't know anyone here. I've never met anyone here. I'm passing through town. I'll never be back. Give me a really great deal on a new car. That's one framing. But if I say, I'm from here, I have family here, I have friends here, I'd love to support your business in the future. I'd love to establish kind of a long-term relationship. I talk with people. I'm going to see you in the supermarket. I'm going to see you on the street. Can you give me a really good deal on a car? Emphasizing kind of the long-term relationship makes it more incentivized for your counterpart to act in ways that are cooperative, that are trustworthy, compared to if they think that this is a one-time interaction. So how you signal your relationship and kind of signal your intentions is quite important. And then finally, be strategically open about your goals and genuinely curious about their goals. And I say strategically because there's this concept called the negotiator's dilemma. The dilemma is that we can really only create a truly collaborative and value creating deal if we're open about what our goals are, what we're trying to achieve, and our counterpart is as well. But if we're super open and our counterpart isn't, then maybe we've released information that they might take advantage of. So being cautious, kind of building trust, building a relationship, being strategic about what you disclose and what you don't disclose is an important part of that. The next is to expand the issue set. So too many negotiations focus on too narrow of a set of issues. So expanding that set of issues, the set of things that you want to talk about, the set of things that you want to build into an agreement can allow for more creativity in crafting a final agreement. And you want to prepare yourself by asking your counterpart, what are the issues you're hoping to discuss? What other issues should we explore? Signal to your counterpart what issues you want to bring to the table, the ones that you really care about. Allow them time to prepare and do your research. What do they care about with respect to those issues? Sometimes it's easy for us to focus most on the issues that are more quantifiable. So a good example of this is focusing on compensation in a job negotiation. But there are likely many other issues that you actually care about. Perhaps a hybrid work agreement, or what division you're going to be housed within, or who you might have as direct reports, or who you might directly report to, or opportunities for advancement, or funds and resources for professional development. All of those things are actually really important issues that might be just as valuable as some of the other the purely economic issues. So thinking broadly about expanding the issue set to make sure that you encompass much more about what you actually care about. Some of these things might be really valuable to you and less valuable to your counterpart, which makes it easy for them to have it your way, and vice versa. You might care less about some things. It might be easy for you to help the other person satisfy some of their goals, but we can only do that by exploring broadly what issues you really want to discuss. Next is balance advocacy with inquiry. So we'll start with advocacy. We often frame our arguments and we kind of frame our pitches in ways that make sense to us, in ways that really resonate and that we find compelling about the things that we care about. However, what we really need to do is we need to frame our arguments in terms of what they care about. What are they concerned about? What are their goals? What problem are they trying to solve? How can we reframe our positions, our arguments in reference to those things? But to do that, we actually need to know what they care about. We need to ask questions. We need to be curious about our counterpart. What's most important to you? What are your goals? How could we improve this offer? Why do you like this? Why don't you like that? Being curious, asking questions, really trying to understand our counterpart allows us to understand what arguments are going to be compelling to them. Going back to some of the behaviors of skilled negotiators, we actually know that skilled negotiators spend much more of their time asking questions. They also spend a greater proportion of their time testing their understanding. Wait, let me make sure I understand you correctly. Summarizing, if I were to summarize, it sounds like this seems possible, but this seems like maybe you're going to have some challenges, and doing both of those, testing and summarizing. Skilled negotiators are very skilled communicators. They're spending more time asking questions, more time listening to their counterparts so that they better understand what are the arguments that they're going to find that they're going to find compelling. So I want to share some fascinating research that happened in the 70s. And the setup was quite interesting. So this actually happened, I believe, in a university center. This is an old Xerox machine, which is a copy machine, a photocopy machine. And the researchers kind of hung out by the copy machine and waited for someone to come and start making copies. And when they were about to start, the researcher subject, and they didn't notify themselves as, or they didn't identify themselves as researchers, came up and said, and asked if they could cut in line. But they asked different people in 3 different ways. So there were 3 different conditions for this experiment. The first one was fairly simple and straightforward. Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine? The next was they wanted to see how that would differ if they actually gave an excuse. Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush? Now, you might not think that's a very good excuse, but it is some excuse relative to the first condition. And then the final one, which is one of my favorite ones, was, excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies? So this is using the word because, but really with no kind of additional information, no real excuse. So we're going to go to our next poll, and I want to get your prediction. Which of these conditions actually had the highest rate of compliance? Which of these conditions did the most people actually allow the research subject to cut in line? So Lisa, if we could launch this poll. Which of these options was most effective? And just select which one you think. Take a few more seconds. All right, Lisa, why don't we shut the poll down and then share the results? Okay, interesting. So excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush? So the request with some sort of explanation was the highest. 59% of us thought that was going to be their case. So let's see the results. So 60% said complied with this first case. And then 94% complied with this second. So just by adding, because I'm in a rush, moved it from 60% compliance to 94% compliance. Now, I think there's a really important message here. How often do we ask someone for a favor? Do we shoot someone an email? Do we kind of ask, hey, can you send me that thing? Or can you do this thing for me, without providing some justification, some rationale? In this case, it increased by about 50%. Now, interestingly enough, this last case, excuse me, I have 5 pages, may I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies, was 93%. Almost identical to the, excuse me, may I use the Xerox machine because I'm in a rush. And the researchers hypothesized that part of this was because what happened after the because was actually less important. And in fact, sometimes we just kind of tune it out. If someone's like, oh, can I do this because, okay, well, you said because, you must have an answer. Sure, I'll go along with it. And the actual excuse was less important than the fact that you had an excuse. Now, they had a separate related study. And in this study, they asked people, they upped it to 20 pages. And they compared this between a small favor, 5 pages, can I cut in line to make a 5-page copy, versus 20 pages. Now, 20 pages copy is a much bigger ask. This is, presumably a much slower machine. And so I want to ask you the same question. Now that this is a bigger favor, what do you think the responses are going to be? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to be different? So Lisa, if we can launch this next poll, please. I'm curious to know your predictions here. How does this differ? 5 pages to 20 pages. Take a few more seconds. All right, Lisa, if we could stop the poll and share the results. Okay, so now a vast majority of us, 78%, think that because I'm in a rush is going to have the highest, will be the most effective way to ask. So here are the results, 24%. So this kind of validates kind of the notion that this is a much bigger ask. Asking for 20 pages is a much bigger ask than asking for 5. It's cut in more than half in terms of the compliance rate. Because I'm in a rush had 42%. Now note, 42% is still almost double 24%. So this offering some sort of justification remains incredibly important when we're asking someone for a favor. And then this last case, because I have to make copies, falls back down to 24%. The researchers hypothesized that this was because as the favor gets bigger, as the ask gets more significant, we're going to be more discerning about the quality of the explanation that's given to us. If someone's asking for us a big favor for us, we're going to want to make sure that they actually have a pretty significant excuse. So I think the lesson here is that when we're advocating for our positions, when we're asking for favors, when we're trying to secure agreements, providing justification, providing a rationale is really important. And it becomes even more important as the favor is bigger. So I want to go to another study. Oh, no, yes, another study talking about the number of reasons. And this is a really perhaps counterintuitive finding that skilled negotiators tended to actually give fewer justifications, fewer reasons for each argument that they forwarded than average negotiators. So skilled negotiators gave an average of 1.8 reasons. Average negotiators actually gave more, 3. And here the researchers hypothesized that the more reasons advanced, the more a case is potentially diluted. The poorest reason is the lowest common denominator. A weak argument generally dilutes a strong. I'm sure you've been in a meeting or you've been in an interaction where someone's like, I really want to do this because of reason A, B, C, D, and E. And maybe A, B, and C were really strong reasons. D and E were kind of weak. What are you going to focus on? Probably D and E. They might have a stronger argument just by focusing on those few strong reasons. So we don't want to dilute our argument just by offering as many arguments as we can, as many reasons as we can. We want to really be thoughtful. Which of these arguments are going to be most compelling for my counterpart? And then finally, what's the right channel of communication? Now, this is a relatively recent study. It was published in 2021. And this was looking at what's the right forum, what's the right kind of medium to ask for favors. And in this study, they asked participants, they were assigned a particular medium, so either face-to-face or video call, and a video message, an audio call, or an audio message. And they said, you're going to ask 5 of your friends through this channel to do a small favor. We want you to predict how many of them will say yes. And then they predict it. And then, interestingly enough, in this study, they actually had the subjects do it. They actually had their subjects reach out to the 5 individuals, and they were able to compare their predictions with the actual outcomes. So I want you to do kind of this similar prediction. So this is our last poll. So Lisa, if you can launch this poll. I want you to predict which media did research subjects predict would have the highest compliance rate, and which media in reality had the highest compliance rate. What do you think? A few more seconds to wrap up. All right, Lisa, let's stop the poll and share the results. Oh, wow, this was not evenly distributed. A vast majority of us, 89%, said face-to-face for both the prediction and the reality. And it turns out this group here in the webinar is good at predicting because that certainly was the prediction. Face-to-face had the highest prediction rate. Interestingly enough, it seems like we're generally pretty good at predicting the relative effectiveness of these different channels, because when they actually had people ask their friends for these small favors, it mirrored kind of the same trend. However, what people weren't very good at predicting is how big the difference was between some of these channels. So a face-to-face versus a audio call, people thought was much closer than actually was. So while we kind of intuitively believe that face-to-face is probably the way to go in most circumstances, we actually underestimate how big of an advantage a face-to-face interaction can actually be. Now, people have asked me, what about kind of age and kind of organizational culture? This is a really important caveat for any research. Research is done on a set of subjects. It certainly can't be generalizable across kind of everyone. It can't be used to kind of define or predict with 100% accuracy what's going to happen. But it is important to consider given kind of what we know, what can I predict about this individual and their likelihood to comply given these different channels, and just to be intentional around the decision. It's really easy for us to kind of shoot off an email. However, if it's, how much more difficult might it be just to kind of stop by their office to pick up the phone call? And depending on what we're asking for, might that extra effort be worth it? All right, moving along. Next is leverage the norm of reciprocity. The norm of reciprocity is an incredibly strong social norm, which basically states that our counterpart typically extends the same behavior approach that we extend ourselves. So what does it mean to leverage this social norm? Well, if we want information from our counterpart, then we can share information. Once we share some information, there's a very strong social norm for them to reciprocate. If we want them to make a concession, we can make a concession. Once we make a concession, there's a really strong social norm for them to reciprocate. The same is true for adversarial behavior. If we act, pretty cagey, if we act aggressively, if we act non-transparently, then that sort of behavior is also likely to be reciprocated. So we really want to model the type of behavior that we want demonstrated to us. We want to be strategic also with the timing and purpose behind the information disclosure and concessions. What do I mean by this? Well, as Emily mentioned at the beginning, I teach negotiations. We do a lot of negotiation role plays and simulations. And sometimes people are like, you know what, I'm just going to be really friendly. I'm going to be really nice. And I'm going to start off the negotiation. I'm going to make all of the concessions right up front. I'm going to kind of go right in and just say, like, this is the best I can do. And just to signal how willing I am to really meet the interests of the other side. However, because they've given all of the concessions that they can give right away, there's nowhere else that they can move. And so their counterpart actually sees them as inflexible and maybe kind of stubborn because they've already given away everything that they can give. So sometimes it makes strategic sense to think about what are all of the things that I'm willing to concede on, but to be strategic about when you make those concessions at pivotal points in the negotiation, so that you actually give yourself some flexibility to move as the negotiation unfolds. Next is generate options. As, again, the authors of Getting to Yes argue, we want to separate inventing from deciding. We want to invent lots of options, lots of possibilities before we're going to put kind of a stake in the ground on which option we want to pursue. We want to encourage creativity and openness. We want to frame the process as a process of collaborative, creative problem solving. I like using the language of options versus offers. Options are just possible solutions that we can explore. Offers are when we start taking kind of a perspective or a stance on some of those options. It's important to generate lots of options, good ones, bad ones, feasible ones, infeasible ones. That can help you clarify different constraints that might exist. It can help you clarify your goals, the goals of the counterpart, before you start picking which options you might want to pursue. With each option, you can talk about what works, what doesn't. Again, you can continue to clarify what are some of the boundaries and some of the constraints of what might be viable agreements. And I like to say, if they aren't ready to say yes, don't force them to say no. Sometimes it takes some time, some trust building, some time to really get to know each other for a counterpart to feel comfortable agreeing with a certain agreement. If you push them for their bottom line, if you push them, take it or leave it, and they're not ready to take it, they might be more inclined to leave it. So you want to keep things open. You want to keep things flexible. You don't want your counterpart to feel like they're backed in a corner because you don't want to inadvertently kind of derail the negotiations if there are hopes for it to continue and progress. Next is package issues together. When you negotiate one issue at a time, it's very difficult to do anything but compromise on each individual issue. It's possible to make a creative deal when each party cares differently about different issues. So for example, I might really care about compensation. You might really care about job location. I might really care about the fact that we go to a beach. You might really care the fact that our vacation's at least a week long. We might care differently about different issues. And if we try to negotiate each issue separately, we're probably going to try to find the middle ground in each one rather than a package that actually makes sense holistically. So discuss several issues at once. Create package deals that include multiple issues. The example I like to give on this one is planning where to spend the holidays with your family. It might be very difficult to negotiate with your loved one where you're going to spend Thanksgiving or where you're going to spend kind of the winter holidays. However, if you package multiple issues together, not just where are we going to spend Thanksgiving, but where are we going to spend Thanksgiving and where are we going to spend winter break? Well, maybe my family has really strong Thanksgiving traditions and routines, and that's really important to me. Your family has really important traditions around Christmas. And so that is an issue that you care deeply about. I might be more willing to concede on that issue if you're more willing to concede on my issue. We can only get there if we package multiple issues at once. It might be even easier when we package multiple years worth of holidays together. So the point here is that we don't want to negotiate issues in isolation because these issues are often tied to each other, and we can create more creative, efficient deals when we think about how these issues come together. To illustrate this, in one of the negotiations that we do in class, students are asked to negotiate with a counterpart across 6 different issues. Each of these issues, each party cares at a different level, and they're assigned points based on how much they care about that particular issue and what option they arrive at. And the payoffs to the recruiter are here on the x-axis, and the payoffs to the candidate are here on the y-axis. So the higher these points are toward the top of the screen, the better the candidate did in this particular negotiation. And the further to the right these points are, the better that the recruiter did. There were 6 issues, and if they were to compromise on each of these 6 issues, both parties would have gotten 4,200 points. Now you'll notice that there's a whole set of negotiations that actually both people did better than had they compromised on each issue. So again, this is just to say, rarely do we care equally with our counterpart about each issue. If we find where do you care most about issues, where do I care most about issues, we're able to create package deals where we each get more of what we each want the most. Finally, and I consider this kind of a more sophisticated strategy, this is make mesos. Mesos stands for multiple equivalent simultaneous offers. So this is where you craft multiple packages that are equivalent across different across different issues, but as a package are of equal value to you. You present these multiple offers and observe how your counterpart responds. So what offers are they drawn to? What parts do they attempt to modify? By offering multiple packages at the same time, it can help you move past an impasse. It can foster a more generative and creative approach. It can signal your flexibility and your creativity, but it can also give you vital information on where their priorities stand. So you might say, I'm willing to take this compensation with this remote work agreement, working within this division and reporting to this particular supervisor, or I'm willing to take this compensation with this division reporting to this supervisor. Both of those might in total be equivalent to me, but they differ on different issues. The final is to aim high. This is the final strategy, to set ambitious goals. Oftentimes, we actually aren't aware at how much value we can actually get out of a negotiation. And to do this, we want to anchor our first offers high. And by anchor high, I don't just mean on kind of numeric or quantitative dimensions, but if we really want to work on a project, to really be ambitious about what working on that project might entail, and set the negotiation off with that kind of ambitious vision of what that offer looks like. High anchors can help reduce the possibility and the likelihood that you're leaving value on the table, that your counterpart might have been willing to give more than you asked for. It also gives you more room to make concessions. If you start with a high anchor, it gives you more flexibility to come further down on that, versus if you start kind of where you want to end, and then there's very little room for you to grow. Again, drawing on some data from some of our negotiation simulations, we actually look at the relationship between the first offer made in a negotiation and the final agreement price. And in almost every negotiation we do, there's a positive correlation, meaning that the higher the first offer is, the higher the final agreement tends to be. And in some cases, every group is different. Every group kind of is influenced by this anchoring bias differently. In some, the relationship is quite staggering, that there's really a strong connection between where a negotiation starts with that initial offer, that initial framing, that initial proposal, and where it eventually ends. So the advice here is to really aim high, get clear about kind of what's the best possible outcome, and make sure that you anchor the negotiation in relation to that. Now, I do want to give some caveats. It's important here to consider context. What are the organizational, social, political norms and expectations? And think about all the possible differences that might exist. So what about the emotional expressiveness? Different cultures and individuals differ on how emotionally expressive they are and how that is perceived by others. In some contexts, it is completely normal to kind of express your emotion quite vividly. And in others, it's considered kind of out of norm and kind of unprofessional. So what is the kind of expectations and norm within the context of your negotiation? How is assertiveness going to be interpreted and experienced? The level of agreeableness. How directly do people agree and disagree with each other? And then also expectations based on social identity and prejudices and biases. There's a lot of research that suggests the negotiating table is not a level playing field, which means that our prejudices and biases influence how different behaviors might be interpreted. And so being aware of kind of the context within what the negotiation is taking place and how certain behaviors or actions might be interpreted is a really important consideration. One particular interesting finding as it relates to gender in negotiation is this distinction between self-advocacy and other advocacy. In self-advocacy, an individual is advocating on behalf of their own interests. In other advocacy, the negotiator is advocating on behalf of other people's interests. Some negotiation scholars encourage females in particular to try to leverage other advocacy because we tend to have sexist stereotypes about the type of behavior we expect of women. And it's more digestible for some individuals to see a woman advocate on behalf of others. So this is an example of how sexist or racist stereotypes can kind of infiltrate the negotiating table and how different approaches might kind of influence how those behaviors are, how those behaviors are perceived. So again, I mentioned that there would be a quiz at the end. Which strategies of those that we discussed have you tried? To what impact, to what effect? Which are you eager to try? And I encourage you, I kind of challenge you to pick one and try it today, whether you're negotiating with a partner, a colleague, a friend. to try to start practicing some of these strategies in your everyday life. Negotiation, like any skill, gets better with practice, with experience, with reflection. So I encourage you to think about how you might be able to leverage and utilize some of these strategies. So that brings us to the end of the formal presentation. I think we've got a few minutes left. So I'm going to invite Emily back. Thank you, Emily, to see if we have any questions from the audience.
Of course. Thank you so much. This is great. And we do have a few questions and a couple of moments to answer those questions. So thank you to those of you who put them in the Q&A box. But also Zachary has given his contact information and we will be sending a recording. So if you missed something or need further clarification, you can always follow up afterwards. But let's get to a couple of questions. One question that came in was how much or which of these strategies do you find people do intuitively versus working to learn and apply them in practice, as you've just asked us to do?
Great question. And I actually think that my answer is going to be for both of those questions, which is clarify your interests. A lot of people think they know what their interests are. They think they have a clear set of goals in their mind, but when you really press them on it, like, what are you really trying to achieve here? What does success look like? They find that their interests are actually quite underdeveloped. And so this is kind of a challenge because intuitively we feel like we know what success would look like. We feel like we know what our goals are, but spending more time to really think about, of all of the things that I care about, what do I care about most? What's a comprehensive view of my goals? What does success look like? Spending more time to do that, whether it's negotiating on where to go for vacation, negotiating your next job, negotiating what project you're going to take on, is a really important kind of foundational step that we think we do. But in reality, most of us could really benefit from taking a little bit more time to do it more thoroughly.
Thank you. And it's true. Everything is a practice, right? All right. So we'll ask two more questions. One is with regard to the channel of communication. This person feels directly asking for something face-to-face may leave the other person by surprise. First, leave a message about my ask, then ask to speak in person or over Zoom to discuss it. Where does this strategy stand vis-a-vis directly speaking face-to-face?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And this is really where negotiation is a human endeavor. You are negotiating with another human. That human has preferences, they have concerns, they have anxieties, they have fears, they have kind of their own expectations about how to interact with other people. And so all of this research is meant to kind of help you think about the different considerations to think about, but it can't be prescriptive in saying this will always work. I personally kind of like the strategy offered by the individual. I will not say, and I've learned this, I've gotten this feedback, if I say, hey, can I stop by my office? I want to chat. It immediately puts people on edge and it makes them concerned, like, oh, did I do something wrong? What's wrong? I kind of foreshadow what I want to talk about. I kind of de-escalate. I give them some time to think about it before showing up. I think this is kind of based on kind of my interactions, that's a really helpful strategy. It also demonstrates kind of your willingness to go the extra mile, stop by their office, pick up the phone, but it also gives them a little bit of a warning, a little bit of time to prepare. So I think that's a really nice strategy to consider.
Thank you. I think that helps with some of the other questions posed around feelings and sentiments. I mean, sometimes these negotiations can come with heightened emotions.
Absolutely.
So are there any further resources or channels that you would direct folks to if they're curious about more on this topic of negotiations, either with regard to the strategies that you've shared or perhaps those identities that may influence their negotiation strategies?
Absolutely. The seminal work in this area is a book called Getting to Yes. It comes out of the Harvard program on negotiation. Actually, a lot of research on negotiation comes out of the Harvard program on negotiation. And so that is a pretty significant work that offers a really foundational view of negotiation and that really influences kind of how a lot of people think about negotiation. So I'd absolutely recommend that book. And that can also direct you in a whole variety of other directions that you might find useful.
That's great. Getting to yes. We will have to link that in our follow-up email. Well, that is our time today. Thank you all so much for joining us. If you do have further questions, as I said, we'll be sharing a follow-up email afterwards, probably early next week, with a recording of today's session and contact information so you can reach out to Zachary directly. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a good rest of your day wherever you are.
Thank you very much.